I boarded the plane in Calgary, Canada to go to Paris, to then fly to Bilbao, Spain. It's an 8.5-hour flight from Calgary to Paris. And I was struggling a little bit with my carry-on because, as you remember, my hand was all wrapped up and I was... Anyway, my left hand was healing, but it wasn't there yet. And being cheap, I didn't check my bag. And I had everything that I needed, including my day pack, stuffed into my Rick Steves, name dropping here, my Rick Steves carry-on bag. And so 22 pounds. And I was struggling, and I was getting it up into the overhead compartment, and somebody helped me. Okay, I'm not all powerful anymore. And then a young Chinese couple got on the airplane, and I had the best seat in the house. I had an aisle seat, and I was about 3 rows from the bathroom. Oh, it was perfect. A young Chinese couple got on, and they were obviously in love, and they might have been on their honeymoon. And they got back to where I was sitting, and he had the middle seat, and his wife, or girlfriend, or I don't know, was behind me, was over there somewhere. And so, being the gallant Christian that I am, I offered to trade seats with the young lady. And they were surprised and thankful and surprised and thankful and thank you and thank you and thank you. But then, realizing too late that I had traded my aisle seat for the middle seat, I realized that the pilgrimage had begun. And I needed to be careful of the help that I offered to others. When we got to Paris, this young man thanked me again and again, and he rescued my overstuffed carry-on from the overhead bin and gave it back to me. So be careful of the help you offer, and be thankful for the help you receive if you're on pilgrimage, or if you're at the grocery store, or anywhere else. For us, a typical day on the Camino involved getting up in a hostel or a hotel, H-O-S-T-E-L, not T-I-L-E, not hostile. Although when you're traveling with other people, you realize that there are some people who are hostile in the morning. But we had a portage service, which meant we weren't carrying all our gear. We weren't carrying all our luggage from place to place. It went ahead of us. Yay! Many, or perhaps most pilgrims, carry everything that they need for the walk. We would pack up our bags and drop them off at the pickup point, and then we would search out breakfast. Sometimes that was in the hotel. It was included with the night stay. Sometimes it would be something that we bought at the grocery store the day before. Sometimes it was at the cafe. Although we did realize in Spain, they have a very different view of how a day should go than we do. And I think it's wonderful. The day starts about 10 o'clock. And it runs until 1:30 maybe, or 2 o'clock. And then things close. So if you don't have lunch by 2, boy, you are in trouble. Because things aren't opening back up again, sometimes until 8 o'clock at night. And so, anyway, we would get up and we would drop our bags, and then we'd go find breakfast and food. And sometimes we would start our walk thinking, well, there's a town that's just 4 or 5 kilometers. And we were doing all this intense math and finally gave up and just said, okay, while we're here, we'll be in kilometers instead of miles. And we would go to the next town thinking, oh yes, we'll stop here and have breakfast and it will be wonderful. And the people that were much faster, they took off ahead of us, and they'll probably be having breakfast there, and we can all regroup again, and won't this be wonderful? And we get into the little town, and we checked our guides, and it all says, food and drink available. Ah, thank you, Jesus. And we would get there and realize that it lied. The guidebook lied. One day, we had breakfast about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Anyway, we didn't walk together as a group, too many different speeds and needs. And usually we were in groups of 2 or 3 or 4. And that's how we'd take on the day. On our first day, it rained. And it rained. And it rained. And it rained. And so we were all trundling out of the hotel where we were staying and seeing the drops falling from the sky, all confidently pulled out our rain slickers, our jackets, our tarps, our trash bags, whatever it was that we were going to wear, and we put them on, and then we trudged on proudly. Isn't this wonderful? We also met our first hill on that day, and it was a 500 or 600 foot ascent up a muddy, slick, curvy bobsled-like run. It was wonderful. 2 of the 3 in my small group received a baptism by mud puddle that day. And I am happy to show you that on the cover, but also imported mud. That's a badge of honor. Or maybe not. What a great way to start. But also, wet socks produce many more blisters. And so almost all of us started our 2-week trek mindful of our feet in a way that we weren't before. Count it all joy, my brothers and sisters, when you encounter various trials. For the testing of faith produces endurance. And it could have rained the next day and many more days, but God was merciful to us. So another pilgrimage adage was, be thankful for the things that could happen but didn't. I am thankful that I had mud on my shoes and not my backside. We knew where we were going each day because the leaders of our group would text us the name and address of the hotel or hostel where we would be staying. So we had a goal. And along the path, we would talk to each other. We'd share our life stories, our struggles, our joys, our concerns. It's common to ask a fellow pilgrim, why are you doing the Camino? And here's what I heard when I asked pilgrims, not of our group, but of people that we passed or passed us. A Spanish woman told me, I'm trying to lose 5 kilograms. From 2 Irishmen who caught up with us and then passed us and then went on, they said, our wives like to shop. So while they're shopping, we do the Camino. There's an international group of 20-somethings, and we saw them quite often because they would pass us, and then when we would get to the next town, they would be seated around a table with beer. And we would pass them, and then they would pass us, and then we would catch up to them at the next little town where they were seated around a table with beers. And we played hopscotch or leapfrog like that for 3 days. They told me, oh, well, it's fun, and you get to meet people. From our group, what I heard from fellow pastors, that they were struggling with the loss of a job. One had been fired a week before the Camino started, fired from a church. Another shared the tough time at church that both he and his wife were going through. Several wondered if the ministry was still right for them. Hard problems at church, and they needed some time away. One was talking about divorce. When you walk with somebody for 3 or 4 hours or even longer, you can dig deep into each other's lives. And at first blush, I have to tell you this, I came away with a deep appreciation of this church. I am thankful for the love and respect that is shared with me. let me rephrase that so I'm sure that you hear. My pilgrimage helped reaffirm how wonderful this congregation is. And when I say congregation, I mean you. You. So in Southern parlance, all y'all is wonderful. And God is good to have brought me here and to have allowed me to stay and continue to minister here. And I want to say that real clearly. Thank you. This isn't the Garden of Eden, but boy, is it close. Now, I'm going to go on too long today, and I'm not even sorry. The northern Camino route that we walked on is very beautiful. It winds through ancient wooded paths, paved roads, cobblestoned city streets, old rock-lined country lanes. People have been walking the route for more than 1,000 years. And it is humbling to walk through that kind of history. And at times, the feeling of devotion to God, of the people that walked there before, you could almost feel it. It's like you were walking along with the saints that have gone before us. There were stone roads where the stones were stood on end like this, side by side by side along the road, and then worn smooth. And you look at the rock wall and everything's rough and jagged, and along the roadway, these stones sticking up out of the dirt were smooth. I think from the feet of thousands and thousands of people who have gone before. And at times, looking at this, it felt very familiar. The dirt and rock paths through the hilly pine forest could have been anywhere here. It was hilly, it was pine, it was a path. It just felt like home. At other times, there was oak and birch and hickory trees lining the path, and it felt a lot like Virginia, where we lived for a long time, or Missouri or Kansas, where I grew up. It just felt so familiar. And familiar places are comforting and helpful when you're facing new challenges. A familiar feeling can give you courage and strength to go on. But at other times, the Camino felt like another world. Stacked stone fences, where do you see those around here? Stone houses, towering, impressive cathedrals. All of this reminds you that this isn't home. This is something different. Cows and horses and sheep and goats all have cowbells that sing different songs to you as you walk along. There were signs in Spanish and Basque and maybe other languages. Strong voices would be overheard along the trail. Not feeling familiar. The sense that this is something new. It's all part of God's subtle guidance to listen for a new voice. To listen for God to lead in a different way. Now, our group would straggle into our resting place for the night at different times. A few in our group were runners. One liked to do, and this just boggles my mind, likes to do marathons. She was a sick puppy. One was a senior Olympic swimming hopeful. I didn't even know there was senior Olympic swimming. Another, a former college gymnast. They walked a lot faster than the rest of us. But a pilgrimage is not about speed. The important part is the road, the doing, not the destination. Because you learn along the way. There's no trophy for being first and no disgrace in being last. I wouldn't know about the first part because I was never first, but I was last several times. Final piece. We would walk along and we would talk with each other and talk deeply and find out many things that we had in common. I know that you know that we had a friend die at Virginia Tech. Somehow we were talking about that, and one of the people in my group said, "So did my brother." That's a commonality and something that we could talk together about and share and console and comfort each other. Pilgrimage is a time to take the time to get to know someone. Another thing that we learned was that we need people. We need people on the trail, people that will walk with us and talk with us and encourage us. But we also need people who can show the love and patience of God by just being with us, that don't talk at all, that listen, or are comfortable enough to walk or sit in silence with us. At one point, as we were traveling along, I promise this is about the end here. At one point, I turned and looked back at two of our folks that were walking behind us and slowly catching up. And they were in deep conversation. And someone had joined this pair and seemed to be listening to their conversation. And I didn't pay much attention to that because that's the way things worked. You would catch up with someone and chat with them for a little bit and walk on, or they would catch up with you and then walk on. A few minutes later, they caught up with us, and I said to them, "Who was the other person that was walking along with you? Where are they from?" And they assured me that they were alone in that section of the walk. And then one of the people said, "But you know, Jesus said, where two or three are gathered in my name, I am there with them." May have been a hallucination on my part, or a drop of water on my glasses, or I was looking through the wrong part of my trifocals. There's lots of good excuses. But Casey and Emily were comforted by the idea that someone else had joined them along their walk, along their pilgrimage. And they were certain that Jesus was on pilgrimage with them. And I pray that for you. You will hear much more about the walk than I did. Because it's going to leak out whether you want it or not. And so practice your rolling of the eyes and all the other ways that you can subtly communicate that maybe you've heard this before or you've heard enough. I don't read those cues very well. But I would like to invite you into pilgrimage, whether it's here or somewhere else, or at the beach, or your laundry room, or your back porch, or a walk down the block. I invite you